Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are going to be doing a single brewer sour review, doing a couple of wild ales from one of my absolute favorite sour beer specialists here, and that's Crooked Stave. These are two I've never had prior, and if the prior offerings I've tried that they have put out are any indication of what we're going to get with these, I am really excited. Several of theirs have been among the top sours I've ever had in my life. So I'm very, very much looking forward to this one today. We will be starting with the Petite Sour Peach. This is a wild ale that's been oak aged and brewed with Colorado peaches, and it clocks in at 4.5% ABV. If you're wondering about why Colorado versus Georgia, of course, Georgia is the state that probably most commonly comes to mind when one thinks of peaches. They are based out of Denver, Colorado, so they're using some locally sourced ingredients. Moving on to number two, this is the Petite Sour Rosé. This one also a wild ale, oak aged, but it's been aged on fruit skins, which is probably going to impart a little bit of flavor, certainly some aroma, and probably produce a nice rosé hue to the beer, I would imagine. This one, as with the prior, clocks in at 4.5% ABV. So without further ado, we're gonna jump right in, starting with the Petite Sour Peach. This one's the wild ale oak aged brewed with Colorado peaches. Okay, jumping right in with our first beer. This is the Crooked Stave Petite Sour Peach. It's a wild ale that has been oak aged and brewed with locally sourced Colorado peaches. 4.5% ABV on this one. Bottle art, they tend to have relatively subdued bottle art. This one's no different. It's got what appears to be a nice bottle of some sour wild ale there, a basket of bread, some ripe peaches cut, and some cheeses with which to pair the beer and the fresh peaches and bread. So nice little scene on there, kind of gets you in the mood, thinking about what you might want to pair your beer with. Let's get this cracked. All right, and poured straight in the glass. All right, this won't quite hold the whole thing, which is okay. And as expected, it's sour, so it's going to form a slight head, but it's not going to hold very well, which is really what I expect and is typical for a sour. This is a beautiful, beautiful beer. Very, very light, pale yellow, kind of straw color, similar to a Saison or many other different wild ale type beers, Gosas, etc., etc. But it looks lovely. Let's give this a sniff. Oh, that smells very nice. That's got that classic pungent Crooked Stave sour punch. You get a little bit of funk. It's kind of Brettanomyces-like in the way that it presents itself. It could well be. I'm not really sure what yeast strains they get in to do their wild ales, but that one's particularly common. Smells fantastic. You get a little funk, a nice bunch of sour and tart, and you certainly get a nose full of peaches. This is quite a pungent aroma too. You can't smell it from, say, like a foot away, but you get a few inches. You don't even have to get completely over the mouth of the glass to detect the aroma. It's got a good bit of presence here. Really smells great. But if you really do get down in there, it blows you away with how enticing it smells. Nonetheless, as expected, that head is basically all but gone. It's got a little cling on the edge, which is perfectly normal for a sour. Let's jump right in, see what this one's about. Oh boy. Oh, that is just a lovely beer. Oh, Crooked Stave. I love your sours. Okay, so this one, as with all the other Crooked Stave beers I've had to date, you get hit up front with this intense sourness, this big sour bite, this nice tangy tartness to it. There is an underlying just little hint of funk. It's not oppressive. It's just enough to let you know, oh yeah, I'm drinking a wild ale here. I'm not drinking a Goza. I'm drinking a wild ale. It's got some wild yeast that has, you know, some wild side characteristics to it. But dominant is sour and tart and just tang. And behind that, it just blooms into a mouthful, an absolute mouthful of fresh peaches. And it tastes so good together with this sour base wild ale style. What a great fruit choice to pair with this beer. This is absolutely bloody incredible. I'm going to jump back in for body mouthfeel and pinpoint this full flavor ride. The body is medium light, 4.5% on a sour. That's pretty much exactly where I'd expect it to be, kind of textbook for the range. The mouthfeel, sours tend to be effervescent. This one's no different. When you roll it around the palate, it doesn't really have much viscosity. It's got a little natural dryness to it, which is very common with sours, certainly with wild ales and many other different beer styles that are similar, which I fully expected. Not much in the way of viscosity and a little dryness to it, but even though this one's effervescent, when you roll it around the palate, it does start to take on a little bit of a creamy edge. That's not super common, but it's quite nice and kind of gives a little dichotomy of texture to the dryness that naturally comes with this beer style. Very, very enjoyable. I'm going to jump in. First, actually, I'm going to top this off just a little bit. I got plenty left in this bottle. We'll get the rest in there. It's fine. All right. Top that off, and I'm going to jump in and pinpoint everything I can notice in this finish for you. Big sour tart tang. Slight funk. Peaches start to open up through that sour and that tang and that tartness. And they just get progressively more intense till they're pretty much in equal parts with the sour and the tart that's lingering from the front sip. And then they become the dominant flavor. It's very strong. It's very nice. The peaches taste so fresh, and it pairs so well with that sour edge, that tart edge. There's just that slight funk you get underneath the sour and the tart in the beginning, and then it gets out of the way. And then it's all about the peach and all about that lingering sour and tartness, but it just subdues. Get that big burst up front, it intensifies, and it gets out of the way in the first few seconds as those peaches continue to bloom in intensity. And then you just have this beautiful, glorious, fresh peach flavor. And then it starts at slow, steady decline on intensity. And how it ends out, you get peaches up front, just a suggestion of remnants of sour and tart, and maybe even a slight little bit of some kind of toast, some bread, some crumb, kind of biscuity, baked good kind of finish that mixes with the peaches, which is also quite common in sour beer styles. And actually, it's quite nice with the dryness that it ends. It pairs well. This is an exceptionally well-balanced beer. I absolutely love it. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores, and when we come back, we will get to the Petite Sour Rosé, also a wild ale, also 4.5% ABV, also aged in oak, but this one will be aged on fruit skins. Okay, now jumping into our second beer of today's Crooked Stave sour review, we've got their Petite Sour Rosé. This one, as with the first, is 4.5% ABV. It's also a wild ale that's been aged in oak, and this one was also aged on top of fruit skins. So I expect it's going to extract some of the fruit flavor. Don't know the exact fruit that they used, but that's also probably where it's drawing its depth of color for the rosé. So quick peek at the bottle art. It's not dissimilar to the prior. It's got a nice bottle of beer with some cheese and bread and fruit laying around. So let's get this one cracked. All right. And poured right in the glass. All right. Now visually, if I'm perfectly honest, it is not the shade I anticipated being labeled rosé, but that's okay. They're not all bright pink, but it is still a very lovely beer. This one is quite a bit darker in hue than the peach. It's kind of an ambery, orangey, yellow color, kind of somewhere in between. Looks nice. Clear as the other one. There's no particulates cladding it up. Pretty effervescent. It did form a head as the last one did, and it's got decent cling on the sides, but as with the prior, I imagine this is going to get out of the way very quickly. It typically does on sours. That's no knock on it. Let's give it a sniff. Okay. This one, in terms of intensity of aroma and the bulk of what I'm getting out of the aroma, it's nearly indistinguishable from the prior. The main difference being I don't detect any fruit on the nose on this really whatsoever. It's just strong sour tart, a slight bit of funk, and that's the big bold aroma that comes through. Yeah, really can't pick out what fruit skins they may have used to age this over, so it'll be interesting when we dive in, but that head's nearly completely out of the way now anyway. Let's go ahead and jump in. Ah, that's nice. Very nice. Big, bold, sour, and tart up front. Just as with the prior, it's exactly what I expect from a Crooked Stave. Behind that, there's an underlying hint of funk. I would say it's slightly more intense on this one than the prior, but not by much. It's not super funky. There's just a hint of underlying, which is very, very common in a wild ale. I actually like that. Helps cut through some of that pungent, sour, and tart. I don't know what fruit skins they may have aged this on, but I could tell you there's a couple different fruit that sprang to my mind while I was sipping on this. One of them easily could have been some of the skins upon which this was aged, and one I would be shocked if they did. But the fruit that came through for me, apple and banana. Banana, I can't imagine they aged this on top of banana peels. Apples would make sense, but that's the actual fruit flavor that came through in the body for me. I'm going to jump in for another sip here. Sour tart funk. When that starts to slowly get out of the way, actually, maybe even taste a little bit like citrus. Perhaps lemon and lime mixed, so lemon lime. Just a slight hint of what tastes to me like banana, though I can't imagine they used any in here, and a little fresh apple up front. Possibly even a little twinge of pear. It's interesting. It changes a little bit with each sip that I take. It's very, very good. This is a nice beer. The finish on this one doesn't last quite as long on the prior. The last one had kind of lingering peaches. This one, it's a little muddled in terms of what the fruit are trying to come through, and it's not as intense and bold. And since they didn't use the actual fruit, just the skins, it's a little hard for it to stick around, and it does have that classic kind of dryish finish. So the finish on this one, the lingering flavor, really, is just a little funk and a little residual sour. There's no real kind of fruit interplay at the end there, so that's what I'm getting. It's nice. It's well balanced. Elements of this beer put me in mind of some other wild ales that I've had. There was that Boone's Huza that we reviewed several episodes back. A lot of this beer's characteristic reminds me of that one. Not quite as brutish, not quite as funky, but the flavor profile of it reminds me of that very, very much. This is a nice beer. I'm going to jump in one more sip here for final thoughts. Actually, let me top this off, and then I will do thusly. Yeah, all right. One more sip for good measure. Oh, it's so bold and in your face. That sour, that tart, that underlying funk. then all these interesting fruit start to pop into play as the sour and the tart major intensity starts to back down a bit. The funk backs down a bit, kind of fruit flavors open up. And then it just takes a slow ride to that nice dry finish where you have that little residual sour, little residual funk, and all those interesting fruit flavors that came through just get out of the way, and that's where it disappears. It's a nice beer. Again, not as long as the finish on the prior, but it's very nice. It's a well-balanced beer. I enjoy it. I'm going to take my time sipping on this one, count my scores, and when we come back, we'll get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've enjoyed both of these delicious sour beers, we're going to get them ranked, starting with the Petite Sour Peach. Again, both beers Crooked Stave, both 4.5% ABV. Crooked Stave is based out of Denver, Colorado. Petite Sour Peach is a wild ale that's been oak aged and brewed with fresh local Colorado peaches. Starting with the aroma on this one, it was very nice and it was pretty well pronounced as well. You could smell it from a decent ways away. Not as pungent as some much bigger beers like some imperial stouts with really high ABVs, but certainly for 4.5%, it really had a nice pungent aroma. You could really get the sour and the peach. I gave it a 9 out of 10. For the taste, absolutely loved it. This was another fantastic sour by Crooked Stave. The sour came through clearly. The classic sour wild ale malt and funk characteristics came through, and the peaches came through. I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. For the body, this had a very nice body. It was pretty much exactly where I expected to be for the style in the ABV range. Perfect 10 out of 10 for me. Mouthfeel, very nice mouthfeel. Wild ales kind of run the gamut, but this followed kind of the trait of the classic fruited sours where they end up having those slightly goza-like toast and bready and crusty notes, and then a drier finish akin to Guza or Alambic, and it was lovely. I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. Finish on this one was nice. It was certainly longer, than some other fruited sours and wild ales, but it wasn't as long as top tier. Really, the thing this one had going for it was the peaches kind of lasted quite a bit longer. But when you're talking a drier finish beer, their finishes tend to be shorter than the ones that are more viscous and wet and stick around the palate. Even so, I give this a high net average. I gave it a 6. Head and retention, it did form a little bit of a head, and it did have a little cling to the sides of the glass, but that got out of the way very quickly, which is very standard for a sour. It gets a 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, this was lovely. It looked pretty much exactly as I expected from a sour wild ale. It was a nice light straw pale color, not dissimilar to a Goza or a Saison standard farmhouse. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Balance on this. This was a very nicely balanced beer. I really appreciate Crooked Stave is not shy about how pungent the sours come through into their beers, and there's always a little underlying funk, but it's not over the top. And I really liked the peach in this. It came through well, but I would have liked even more. Just a little more peach in here to give a little extra intensity, I think would have helped the finish extend a little longer, even though it's a little dry, and would have added a little extra peach backbone to help cut through some of that astringent sourness. But I still enjoyed it. I give it a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, very nice beer, very enjoyable beer, an excellent wild ale. For me, it was just a few little categories that I wished were a little more intense to kick it up, but I give it a 9 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I mimicked my subjective. I also gave it a 9 here. I docked a few points in a few categories, but overall I thought this was an excellent wild ale. Very, very good, very well done, well deserving of a 9 out of 10. That brings the total score on the Petite Sour Peach to a 92 out of 100. So a well above average wild ale here. It was excellent and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Moving on to the Petite Sour Rosé. This one, same ABV, same deal, wild ale, oak aged, but this one was aged on top of fruit skins. Though they didn't specify the fruit, I got some interesting mixes of fruit in the palate when enjoying this one. For the aroma, This one was nice. It was just like the others, certainly well above average. It just wasn't quite as pungent. I think the peaches in this one helped it stand out. This one you had to get a little closer, but still above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the taste, I really enjoyed the taste on this one. It reminded me of a lot of different sour style beers, which is no knock on it. For me though, personally, I would have liked the fruit skins to impart a little more flavor. This had a little bit more in common with some other different beer styles, but I only docked 1 point. I give it a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. Body on this, same as the prior for the same reason, gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same as the prior, same reason, it gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Finish on this one. Finish on this one was not as long as on the Petite Sour Peach, and really it was the peach that helped extend it on this one. This one, without the intense fruit flavor, in tandem with the dry finish, it was on the shorter end. It wasn't low end, but low end of average. I gave it a 4. Head and retention, same as on the Petite Sour Peach, same reason, it gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance on this one. Now, calling it rosé, I did expect it to have a pinkish, reddish, orangish hue, and this really had a more deep orangey yellow amber hue. I didn't get where they were coming up with a rosé on this one, but it was still a nice looking beer. I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. Balance on this, I thought this was a very, very well balanced beer. Considering it was only aged on fruit skins and not actually brewed with fruit, I think that they pulled it off very well. There was a lot of interesting fruit flavor that I picked up, and different fruit kind of came to me with each subsequent sip. And honestly, I thought it was balanced beautifully. Since it wasn't actually brewed with whole fruit, I thought the balance was perfect. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Filling in the intangible. I enjoyed this one, though subjectively, I still would have liked a little more pronounced flavor to come through, imparted from the fruit skins, and I really would have liked a little deeper pinkish reddish hue for the rosé, but I still really enjoyed it. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this is another one where I looked at various categories. I docked points, but overall, I think this is another excellent, excellent sour. It wasn't brewed to be a fruited sour per se. It was just aged on fruit skins, so that added some definite aroma elements. Certainly it imparted some color, though not what I expected, and it added some very interesting flavor elements. I thought it was very well done, well above average. It gets a 9 out of 10. That brings the total score on the Petite Sour Rosé to an 87 out of 100. So all total here, we're only looking at a 5-point spread. Both of these well above average offerings. If you're a fan of wild ales or fruited sours indeed, I think these two are well worth seeking. I thoroughly enjoyed them. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I sincerely appreciate you tuning in. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And if you want to keep in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can just click the notification bell right next to the subscribe button. Till next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.